Hello, Dr. Dyke Drummond here at the home of thehappymd.com in beautiful Seattle, Washington. Welcome to the latest episode of the Physicians on Purpose podcast. Tools so you can recognize and prevent your own burnout. Stories of burnout put to its highest and best use, and wellness leadership strategies. Everything you need to be a physician on purpose. Hello again, this is Dr. Dyke Drummond at thehappymd.com in beautiful Seattle, Washington with the latest edition of the Physicians on Purpose podcast. And we're going to have a good time today because one of the friends of the broadcast that I've been wanting to introduce to you for a while, Dr. Kim Lucas, is an internist in Tempe, Arizona. And we're going to talk about a topic that's gotten a little bit of press in the last few years as burnout rates have soared. But the question is this. Okay, I'm a doctor. I may have struggled at some point in time with burnout and had to torque my career to be a little bit different than I planned when I chose to go to medical school. But now my daughter says she wants to go to medical school. What do I tell her? What do I not tell her? What do I warn her about? Do I let her do it? What in the world happens now? So Kim, tell us a little bit about your daughter. She shall remain, let's let her remain anonymous, but tell us a little bit about you, your family, your daughter, all that kind of stuff. And let's talk about this. How do you talk to your kids about going to medical school conversation?
All right. So she's the daughter of two physicians. So her dad is also a doc. He's from abroad. My parents are abroad and from the same country where he was born. And the way I got to know him was I went to medical school in Hungary. And I grew up with the idea that, being a doctor is a safe way. You're always needed. And as my father would say, even if you land in prison, for political reasons, because everybody ended up in prison for political reasons, they'll still need you and you're most likely going to have food and you'll survive. So that was the kind of mindset that I grew up with, along with engineering, doctoring, nursing, science-based careers are okay because they're not tied to any type of ideology or language need to, being really good or anything else. You can show up anywhere and do science or be a doc. Now, it's not that simple, but it kind of is. So that's what I grew up with. And her dad became a physician. Nobody pressured him, but he found that he had some personal experiences. And through that, around his young teens, he decided he wanted to be a doctor. We both loved medical school. We both did really well with it. We trained together in this country and, it had its moments, but basically we enjoyed it. And for most of the time, we've really liked being doctors without, usual changes in career things that you can have in any career.
Well, before
Yes.
we go any further, let's set a stage here because I think it's probably important that people know our generation. So for instance, I'm 63. How old are you, if you're willing to disclose?
I just turned the big 60, and
Okay,
I think
great.
a flip got switched. I don't know. So it's a good switch that no, not the flip got switched. The switch got flipped. And yeah, and in our generation, it was basically, you find something to do and then you work at it and you work at that. I mean, and it was about that simple, Dyke, right? It was.
Well, and it sounds like the programming that you had coming from Eastern Europe is that it's safe. It's safe. You
Totally.
can land anywhere, make a living. You can be expert at it. It is doable. And as a parent, I'm probably happy that my child is a doctor.
Yes.
Because they'll always be okay, right?
Yes. And, your work is not measured subjectively. So your work security is pretty good, not just from a political standpoint, but economically and a lot of other things. And he would say, if you want to play the violin, you can be a really good violinist and still be a doctor. But you can't you can be a really good doctor and still be a violinist. But if you're a violinist and you decide to be a doctor, that's kind of hard.
Right.
There was a brief time when I wanted to be a movie editor. And then I got accepted to medical school and I was like, yeah, I think I'll just do the medical school thing. And I don't regret that. There were times when I wondered, but overall, looking back, I made the right decision for myself.
So here we
So
are,
here we
40
are.
years later, and you have an American-born daughter.
Yes. Now she grew up among doctors. She went to the office a lot with me. It's shocking how much she knows about medicine. She worked as a medical scribe. She never really did anything in the office, but she spent a lot of time at the office, and she's probably heard way more conversations than, most people do. And she understands, the lifestyle. So her dad does anesthesia. I was a primary care physician. I worked for people. I had my own office, then worked in a group, and now I'm an employee. So she's seen a good range of things. And I wouldn't say every friend of mine is a doctor, but there are several in our social groups on both sides. If you want to be a doctor, be a doctor. But if you don't want to be a doctor, don't be a doctor. And even kids who ask me, medical students or anybody, they're always like, well, is it a good job? And it's like, it's a good job if it's the right thing for you, but it's not an absolute. So I'm a little bit softer on it than with my parents. And people can have other talents. She went into college doing pre-med. And by the end, she was a little bit of an entrepreneur. She started an organization for homeless people. From there, she started a transportation and health navigation for the underserved and homeless. And from that, developed a company just for navigation purposes, which she has been doing for, they were supposed to start almost as COVID hit. So it was a bit delayed, but they were still planning. So she's been doing that almost for 2 years and successfully. But here she is wanting to go to medical school.
So how old is she now?
26.
Okay, great. So I don't know about you, but when I was going to medical school, it was pretty much of a track, right? It was college, med school, residency, all in a line. And so I chose to go to medical school when I was 21, who was in medical school when I was 22. She has actually started her own nonprofit, is CEO of her own nonprofit, and is 26. So she's got a little water under her bridge too. She's taken a break, seen business from other angles, and now she's thinking back and wants to go to medical school almost as an afterthought to her nonprofit career.
Yes. And she also has this helping thing. So the light worker, I think she has the light worker gene. Now, and by the way, my mother is a nurse. So, but I'm the first doctor in the family, and so is her dad. So there's this idea of, I want to make a difference in the world and I want to help people. She likes what she's doing, but there are parts of it that she doesn't like. She just wants to be a physician, as far as, we've kind of explored it. And that's one of the wrinkles, exploring these things with your own kids is a lot more loaded than exploring it with, someone who's not a family member or close. How do I say this? I guess you're at stake too. So you're a stakeholder in their lives, as opposed to being a little bit more distant. So
you have literal skin in the game.
Literally, yes, yes, yes.
Well, and I was thinking too that there's all these polls. One of the popular questions in burnout polls is that one that says, would you, on a scale of 0 to 10, would you recommend medicine as a career to your firstborn child? It's an abstract question, but people get all excited over the fact that most doctors say no. But here we are, your firstborn child. We're actually talking about this. And we're also talking about this from you as her mother, who has 40 years of water under the bridge of the actual making a living as a physician. So
right.
When she said, Mom, I want to go to medical school, what was your first reaction?
Oh my.
Oh my.
Well, it's more about, I don't have a firm feeling that she should go or she shouldn't go. It's more about, are you doing the right thing for the right reason? Are you asking the right questions? Because, it might be the right answer for a certain question, but is really that the question you need to be asking? What is it you're seeking? And hopefully that they can navigate that idea of what they're seeking well, and that's my main concern, that process be good. And then if that's where it seems to be, then I'm happy with that. And I would support her no matter what. But it's more that question. And how does that process look? And I told her too, I said, well, no one's going to tell you, Vivian, that going to med school is a bad idea because, everybody's, they've still asked, is Vivi going to go to medicine or should she go to medicine or she should go to medical school? But I said, no one's really going to tell you it's a bad idea, right?
Right. And then, but this is a little bit like what we teach doctors that are burned out, that have sort of lost their way along the path of their career, is we teach them a triad here. And the triad is vision, strategy, tactics, in that order. So medical school is a strategy. And what you're saying is, what's your vision? And will medical school get you there?
Right.
What we're trying to do is make sure she's on the right track and headed in the right direction to get to her vision of what she wants her future to be. And this is the same thing we do with burned out doctors, is what's your ideal job description? Let's figure out what that vision is so we can make these adjustments. The other thing I'll say is, I know your daughter. I know you and I know your daughter. And I suspect that she's different than you and me in our generation, in that I don't know anybody that I went to medical school with or that I had as a clinical colleague who ever considered anything else with their career than seeing patients. I'm going to graduate from medical school and have an MD after my name. I'm going to go to residency and I'm going to see patients and make a living that way. I don't get the idea that your daughter is set on that track. She may use her MD for something completely different.
Definitely. I think that's quite possible. And I think she sees that as well. And she's gained a lot of experience and she's actually quite good at what she does. So she has a lot of talents and I'm not worried. But, medicine, especially where you get to a point where at least you have a degree and then do you go and do residency? You're talking about a big time commitment. That's 7 years of your prime years, especially also, as a young female, you have childbearing, things in that. And all those things are getting a bit better. It's still a fact that, you have to be pregnant and have a young baby, have demands on you, and your own demands on you. So it's not just what school needs or the training program needs. If you want to excel to a certain degree, it's tough.
Well, and back in the day, we didn't bat an eye on the 7 to 11 years that it took to be a doctor. It was just the rite of passage. And remember, it was unrestricted work hours. So it was a totally different thought process. We had to survive it. We had to make it through, and it was onerous, but that's just what you had to do. Why? Because that's the way we've always done it, right? That's the only thing I could ever get out of a professor. Why are you doing this to us? Because that's the way I was treated, right?
And, and then by the end of that process, whether it's the 4 years or the 7 years, there's a lot of sunk costs. And we all know the psychology of sunk costs. They're hard to leave. Is it wrong to leave them? No, but it's a fact. It's a barrier. And then not to mention, your psychological or energy sunk costs, but also monetary, et cetera, et cetera. Lost opportunity cost. And as as you get older, you realize the value of that. It's a little bit different on the other end, but thank God we have young people too. So I can see that philosophically, but as a parent, you're a little clutchy, especially at 60. So
clutchy, I like it. Okay, so I'm sitting here trying to imagine me as a 21-year-old in college saying to myself, what do I do now? I have an honors degree in biology with a 397. By the way, the only classes I didn't get A's in were anti-utopian fiction and film and co-ed volleyball. So I didn't know how to do pass fail because I was a schoolboy and I came across the pond and I didn't know how to do pass fail. So, but I said to myself, what am I going to do now? And it turns out that if I was going to go on a biology trajectory into a master's program, I would have been a lab rat, and I couldn't handle that at all. So I submerged myself in medicine and ran the gauntlet. I'm just trying to imagine your daughter sitting there going, well, I've got this nonprofit and it's working out pretty well. And maybe I'll get an MD, but 7 years, that's too much. I'll take that MD and I'll do something else with it. There's just a whole different thought process around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably needed because there's so many new things that weren't, 40 years ago. So I do think you need people who are MDs doing other things. But how much does medical school give you that minus the training? So again, that's kind of an iffy question in my mind is, what can you get out of it? Although it does say, you did something, it's not easy to get an MD, and it says that your you're smart and you can learn, and it says a lot.
You passed the bucket of marshmallows test.
That's right. And I was talking to my former boss, and he said, I have two people in my organization. He's a medical director of a Medicare Advantage plan, and it's not like a medical director in a clinic. It's a bigger job. And he has two guys. One left after medical school, and he's now a certified coder. And he did not do training. The other one did finish training, and he's working as a medical director, I believe, or reviewer or something to that extent. So
when you say training, you mean residency? Right?
Residency, yes.
Gotcha.
And thank God all those things are they're not what you and I experienced, And weirdly enough, I liked it. I really loved it. My third year of residency, especially when they brought in that night float stuff, I kind of felt like some of that was just labor, and I resented that. And I missed my some more of those electives. So that pissed me off. But up until that point, I was really enjoying it.
Well, and I enjoyed medical school and residency. I was a gunner, right? You aren't going to outcompete me. I was going to be top of the food chain, not in the academic setting, but working hard. I was captain of the local rugby team and all that kind of stuff. Toxic masculinity incarnate, right? And I could see that now. But I was certainly beat up by the system. I was traumatized, lost a baby as a resident, all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to think. Most of the people that I deal with are clinical physicians and folks who manage clinical physicians. I can't imagine that an MD gives you the right to supervise a bunch of practicing doctors unless you have not only graduated from a residency program. Again, I still don't think you learn until you're out in practice. You better have 10 years of experience on your belt as a practitioner before you're going to start creating a context or environment or culture for practicing doctors, I would think.
Right. Although, it's funny, I do have a person who's my age. She was actually in residency with my daughter's dad, and she was doing anesthesia, and about, I don't know, second year somewhere, she just said, done, jumped ship, finished up an occupational residency, and then became a very, very young vice president at Aetna or USA Health or one of those organizations. And she's one of these people who's like super brilliant, speaks 3 languages, and she actually still knows her medicine. It's really quite amazing. So there are people who can take what they learn in medical school and really, really retain it and still run with that. Now, she left that and ended up doing something different. She's an exception, that she was able to actually have a leadership. Now, it wasn't an insurance company, but still. And she was a young star. And by the way, this is an aside, but she was the one where I first saw like executive training and coach training. She would tell me about all these classes that they were putting her through. And I was like, gee, why don't they teach that stuff to doctors?
Because you're supposed to stay on the assembly line and keep churning out the RVUs, right?
But,
well, I mean, as you talk about that, I'm just reminded that the healthcare industry is 17% of the GDP. And certainly a clinician, a person with an MD after their name, seeing patients in the line as a clinician is only one job description that an MD would benefit, right?
Right. So she was able to do that. But I agree with you that, without some practice, you're a little bit, no. And will people respect what you say? Like you don't know what you're talking about. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So let's say that your daughter goes to medical school, right? Let's say she does it, right? And it's her decision because you're just making sure she's on the right track, like she's heading in a place that she really wants. What role do you envision yourself playing as she's having conversations with you about the stresses of medical school down the road?
Like that nail in the head video.
It's not about the nail.
It's not about the nail. You just, you listen. And I've thought about it in great detail, and I guess it depends. But, anything your parents tell you, it's always like a delayed reaction, where you're like, oh yeah, and I have more and more of those. My dad passed 4 years ago, and there's stuff that I'm now like, oh, I get what he said, or my mother talks about what her mother said. And my mother is 86 years old. And some of those aha moments came to her 5 years ago, and they keep becoming bigger. So you're like, yeah, that's just, I guess that's really the original sin where you can't, tell your kids exactly how it goes. And it's just the nature of, I think, life. But I imagine, babysitting and other things, it'll be like just supporting her, but when she comes with those, I don't know, you bite your lip. I don't know. But good question. Good question.
But it's interesting that the black and white question that gets asked on all these surveys, how likely are you to recommend medicine to your firstborn child, is obviously not a real question. It's not the way you live a 4-year journey with your child through medical school. It's not the way you talk about these things with your kids. And so thank you for leading us through a more nuanced thought process here as we potentially contemplate how to advise our children or grandchildren, perhaps, going forward.
And I also, one of the things I tell a lot of people is, we all end up on a hamster wheel of one kind or another. The Queen of England is on a hamster wheel, and she's done a great job of it for a very long time. So the trick, the skill is figuring out what's the best hamster wheel for you and making that choice. That's what I would distill it down to, right?
Gotcha. In the end, everything devolves to work.
Yes, everything. Being a wife, being a mom, being anything you choose, even being a celebrity, it's friggin' hard work,
And by the way, that's a Drucker quote, a good Austrian leadership development guy. Is there anything else you want to do or say or ask to be complete for this little interview, Kim?
Thank you. And I hope it's, useful.
Well, and I'm going to be interested to watch you and your daughter as she goes through this journey, because if I was a betting man, my money would be on her out at 4 years and applying herself someplace in business with an MD behind her name, but probably not seeing patients.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing that this invites me to do, if I'm looking at my higher self, is to really be curious, stay open, and be supportive in that way. Like, life happens and who knows? So we'll see.
And then I'll just refer back to this triad: vision, strategy, tactics. When she starts talking to you about stress or things like that, my thought process as a parent runs to just checking her vision. Are we still headed? Are we still headed in a direction that when you arrive, you're going to dig it? Which is what we do. It's a core piece of what we do with all the doctors that see us because of burnout and overstress. Right on. Well, this is awesome, Kim. Thank you so very much. Dyke Drummond.
Thank you. Ciao. TGIF.
There you go. The latest edition of the Physicians on Purpose podcast. It's been me and Kim talking about what happens if your kid wants to go to medical school. First of all, don't pull all your hair out. Check it out. And then this particular episode is sponsored by our Burnout Proof MD 3-layer physician support ecosystem. There's some links down below to teach you more about the ecosystem so you can decide whether you want to come in from the cold. We'll see you on the next podcast. Until then, keep breathing and have a great rest of your day.